Hey everyone, Mario again coming at you with another literature review. It is now time for the second novella from different seasons, Apt Pupil, or is it subtitled Summer of Corruption. Now, this one technically consists of 29 chapters, though some are longer than others, depending on where in the story it goes. And it's written in a more traditional King style compared to Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. And like that one, it's just as thrilling, but for different reasons. Now the film wasn't made into a film, so excuse that little error. The novella takes place in the 70s, and it mentions a little bit of the politics of the time, but not a lot. Mostly what it mentions ties into the main plot, which involves a teenager named Todd Bowden who arrives at the doorstep of an elderly German immigrant named Arthur Denker, who actually is a Nazi named Dussander in disguise. Dussander apparently was the commandant of a fictional Nazi internment camp responsible for the deaths of many Jews during the war. And I don't think I need to go over all the atrocities that happened in those camps in this video. I think anyone who even has a basic knowledge of World War II history knows all the stuff, all the gas chambers, all the teeth stuff, which they do mention a lot of it in passing. And you can imagine Dussander with that, he's a very, very wanted man, which makes the situation that they find themselves in at the beginning of this story very precarious, because Todd knows exactly who Dussander is, and even though Dussander is trying to pass it off, I am not this Dussander character you know about. My name is Arthur Denker, I came to this country, blah 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 blah. And he even tries to hold his ground, but Todd holds his ground and he's like, a boy figured it out. What do you want? Money? I don't have any. Nope, Todd doesn't want money, instead, he wants information. 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 Who are you? Sorry, I couldn't resist that pun. He wants information about what went in the camps. Not the sanitized version we learn in American history, the full lecture version. And you can imagine Dussander, even though he was the commandant on this, he's like, he doesn't want to do it at first, but he eventually relents and starts giving Todd lectures, if you even want to call them that, about what happened in the camps. And just the thought of it. Now, the scenes that Dusander's actually describing stuff don't go on very long, but they're long enough to make you like feel a little dirty while reading, and it's like, ew. I can see why someone wanted to turn this into a movie. This would make the audience very uncomfortable. And it gets to the point that Todd starts to have nightmares, and a couple of them are even described, one of which Todd apparently gets weirdly aroused by and has nocturnal emissions. And I'm not going to even describe this nightmare that he has. I think you guys should actually go out and read the novella for yourself and read it, because it's a very freaky scene. I haven't seen the film, so I don't know if they put this to film in any shape or form, but just reading this, I'm like, if they didn't film this, I can see why, but it would have made a very, very freaky and uncomfortable nightmare sequence. You could have shot this with wide-angle lenses, lit it in a way that it would have been very eerie. You could tell it's a dream, but it would still have made it very uncomfortable to watch. And if you've read the novella, you probably know what scene I'm talking about. It's the dildo scene. That's all I'm gonna. The dildo vibrator scene. That's all I'm gonna say about it. I think if you can kind of guess around what it involves, and if you know anything about Mengele and some of the stuff he was involved with, you can also kind of guess a little bit. Now, Dussander is also having nightmares, and he's later on finds a way to alleviate it. And what is it? He commits murder. First, he starts with animals, like any sociopath, and then he goes to humans. And considering he's a harmless-looking old man, you can imagine how he does it. Excuse me, sir, would you like to have a drink at my place? Blah, blah, blah. I know it sounds a little weird, an older man walking up to you randomly if you're a homeless guy. Because they do mention there's a lot of homeless people around in this fictional suburb of San Diego that they live in. But the old man, was like, it's an old man, how harmless can he be? Well, you know what they say about never judge a book by its cover, and appearances can be deceiving. So some of those men that go home with Dussander, they pay the ultimate price for their foolishness, as you would say. Now, at the same time, Todd occasionally starts killing people as well. And there's also a little subplot about him, because of the nightmares, his grades slipping, partially due to the nightmares, and also him not being able to study because he's spending too much time with Dussander. So he kind of blackmails Dussander into posing as his grandfather to give his counselor this BS story about his parents having marital issues. And Dussander, decides to do it. But now he has something to hold over Todd, because Todd not only talked him into doing this, but then the whole thing about knowingly knowing who a Nazi war criminal was and not turning him in. So, to take a line from Jeffrey Jones, there it is. And after that, they see each other every now and then, but it's not like how it is at the beginning. Now, by the end, I guess you could figure some of the stuff that happens. Dussander's eventually found out. I'm not going to spoil how, but it's a very, very poetic way. And as I was reading it the first time, because this is the second time I've read it, I'm like, okay, I think I know where this is going based on the name of the character who discovers him out. I'm like, they're going to go in that way. And it's such a poetically ironic way that he's found out that you're like, okay, this seems like a Deus Ex Machina because of what happens, but it's one that you could actually see happening just randomly. And the character even thinks that God did it so he could catch him. So that's why I say it's kind of a Deus Ex Machina, but it comes off being natural. And you even got the Nazi criminal chaser. And there's a couple things that go back with Todd and all that. I'm not going to get into heavily in here, but if you were in the Hunter's situation in all this, you would probably suspect this a little bit too, especially with one of the crime scenes. Now, one thing it also goes into, it touches a little bit on it, but not a lot, is the whole nature and nurture thing. But it's very, very subtle. Something that if in a movie version you could have done it, like I don't know if they touch on it in the other movie. I know they changed the ending of the movie in comparison to the novella, so maybe they don't touch on it as much. But if they ever did remake it, like I can tell you, if I did a remake, I would actually raise that up a little bit. Maybe make it seem that Todd's talks with Dussander are really changing him, at least up here, for the worse. So even though he has everything else going for him, this whole dark nurture thing is changing him in a bad way. Or maybe he already had that predisposition genetically, he didn't have the environmental factor until he met Dussander, and then that's what made him go off a little bit. Because the ending is such a dark note, and it's only written in one sentence that you're like, wow. I mean, there's a lead up to it, but with the last line, it's like, ooh. You can't really say much more other than that. Because several times earlier in the story, Todd is thinking of going off the deep end, but it's that one thing where, like, it's kind of like that thing that we all go through when we're thinking about doing something dark, but it's like, it's only your imagination. Yeah, as long as you're just thinking about it, but don't go and act on it, no harm, no foul. It's not like this is a Minority Report verse where you think about it, or you're like, I'm going to go tomorrow and do it, and you're in trouble. Now, this is before you take religion into account. Like, I'm going to go down to 47th Street and commit a moral sin. Save your bus fare. You did it, man, as Carlin once said. He's not acting on the impulses at first, but by the end, of course, he does. But leading into it, you're like, ooh, this guy. Was he thinking some of this stuff before he met Dussander, or is it just Dussander's influence that's making him think this? So, like I said, a little bit of that nature-nurture debate, but not a lot. And, of course, by the end, he starts to act on him. It's like, ooh, he's really gone down the deep end. And that's the thing I like about the parts that are written around Todd, because you really get to see what's making him click. And from the beginning to the end, a couple of years that pass in between, you're like, ooh. The worst thing that could have happened to this kid was him recognizing Dussander from an old World War II photo he saw, and then connecting the pieces. Because the first thing that Todd mentions that got him interested was these old World War II magazines that were in his friend's garage, him reading them and being fascinated by him. So that's why I say he probably had that up here already. It's just him meeting Dussander made it worse because, he went right to the source, as it were. So you could say that probably Todd at the beginning was a sociopath or had sociopathic tendencies. It's just step A, finding the magazines. Step 2, finding Dussander, and then the rest, domino effect. And of course, the scenes we see with Todd's parents, we could see, he came from a good home. I mean, his dad did the whole little thing with the secretary that Todd mentions he knows about, but it's like, no harm, no foul, as long as he doesn't do anything other than a couple rendezvous. If he does something worse than that, then it's like, And they're both good people, so it's one of those things that, like, Like, I can imagine after the end, the parents are like, "Oh, we don't know why he could have done this. Probably those kids, some of those kids he's hanging around with. But oh, Dussander, he poisoned our son." In a way, they'd be right in doing that blaming thing, but then there's the whole genetic thing, which we don't know whose side of the family that could have come from, because you don't really get the answer. So it could have been maybe they both had carriers, or it could be like the theory about why that one genetic disease entered the royal families of Europe, where it was just a random allele that just had to reproduce in the wrong manner, and then, whoa, off of the races. Genetics are weird like that. Now, as you can tell, this is a novella that comes with my highest recommendations. If you have seen the film and are not the fan of it, because from what I understand, this is one of the films that is faithful to a point to this novella, but not that great, which is sad considering that two of the other stories that were adapted into films based on the novellas in different seasons, Stand By Me, which comes from the body, and of course Shawshank Redemption, are not only considered some of his better adaptations, but at least, especially with Shawshank, some of the better films made ever. It's kind of a shame, but I'll give my thoughts on it one day when I watch Apt Pupil. I know before they made that film, there was another attempt to film it, but I guess apparently funding ran out and then someone died, from what I heard. But it'd be nice to at least see that footage, if they'd ever let it be seen. Then you can compare what they were going to do with that film versus what happened with the second one, and who knows, maybe the first film would have been vastly better, and it would have been looked at in the same light as Shawshank and The Body. Or excuse me, Stand By Me. But, that's a what if. I don't know what rating I would give it, at least probably a 4, but it's one of those ones like it's a little difficult to give a rating to something like this. But I'd say, yeah, 4. Yeah, I'll give it a solid 4. Like I said, it comes with my recommendation, especially if you are a fan of some of King's more non-horror ones, because this one is not horror in the traditional sense of how King normally writes it, but it does deal more with that psychological aspect and the whole, like you said, sociopathic thing, which in a way is a little scarier than something supernatural because it can actually happen. But then it's a little bit more mundane compared to the more over-the-top horror stuff that King writes about, but it's still scary in its own right. And it's a lot shorter than some of his other ones. Being probably about the same length as Carrie, more or less. Maybe a little shorter than that, so it doesn't take that long to read. Like, if I were to just sit down from sunrise to sunset, I could probably knock it out in a couple hours, reading full on. But that's just me. I don't know if you read about the same speed as me, you might knock it out faster. If you read slower, it might take the whole day, but definitely worth the time. Or if you want to skip it, audiobook might be interesting. Wonder what type of voice they'd give Dussander.